"Your things are already packed, Mom," my son declared as he and his wife ambushed me in my kitchen. "The retirement community has an opening, and we've already put down the deposit. It's time to be realistic." That night, while they slept upstairs, I wrote a farewell letter and left it on the dining room table along with the deed to my Victorian home, now transferred to my late husband's foundation for aspiring artists. 3 months later, I watched from my garden as my son, tears streaming down his face, read the letter announcing the home's transformation into a community arts center bearing his father's name. Before we jump back into this story, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against well-meaning but misguided family members. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved an even more incredible story for you. I was born Eleanor Richards in 1952, in the coastal town of Millhaven, where generations of my family had lived since the late 1800s. My childhood home, a magnificent 3-story Victorian on Sycamore Lane with its distinctive turret and wraparound porch, was more than just a house. Built by my grandfather in 1903, it stood as a testament to our family's creative legacy, a place where art wasn't merely appreciated, but lived and breathed in every corner. My father, William Richards, was the town's most respected architect. From his wood-paneled study, I watched him transform blank pages into schools, churches, and civic buildings that would define Millhaven's character for generations. My mother, Sophia, taught piano and voice, her students flowing through our front parlor in a constant stream of scales and arpeggios that became the soundtrack of my childhood. "Creativity isn't something you do, Ellie," my father would tell me as I sat beside his drafting table. "It's something you are." This wasn't just philosophy but practical wisdom that shaped our family's approach to life. We didn't merely consume beauty. We created it, cultivated it, and shared it with others. By age 7, I was sketching alongside my father, learning how shadows fell across buildings and how perspective could transform a flat page into a world with depth. At 12, I was painting in oils, my early harbor scenes showing promise that local artists who gathered in our home on Sunday evenings were kind enough to encourage. Our Victorian wasn't a museum, but a living gallery. Every wall displayed artwork, some valuable pieces by recognized talents, others treasured works by family members or struggling local artists my parents supported. My grandmother's watercolors hung in the drawing room, while maritime scenes, by a fisherman-turned-painter my father had discovered at the docks, adorned the dining room. My mother's collection of handcrafted pottery lined shelves my grandfather had designed specifically to showcase them. These objects weren't status symbols, but manifestations of my family's core belief that beauty deserved preservation and creativity required nurturing. Our massive oak dining table regularly hosted artists, musicians, and craftspeople from all walks of life. The established sharing meals alongside the struggling all welcomed equally into the creative community my parents cultivated. School provided formal education, but my real learning happened in museums in Boston, at concerts in Providence, and in the community center art classes where my father volunteered design services and my mother organized music programs. Art wasn't an extracurricular activity in our household, but the primary lens through which we engaged with the world. After graduating high school in 1970, I attended the Rhode Island School of Design, specializing in painting and art history. My undergraduate thesis exploring how domestic spaces influenced artistic development wasn't just academic research, but an examination of my own upbringing in a home designed to foster creativity. It was during my graduate studies at Boston University that fate intervened in the form of Thomas Bennett, a brilliant composer whose modern classical pieces were beginning to attract attention in serious music circles. Tall and thoughtful with prematurely silver hair, Thomas approached music with reverence rather than ambition, as a calling rather than a career path. Our courtship unfolded against a backdrop of gallery openings, symphony performances, and long, Walks along Boston's waterfront discussing art, music, and creative purpose. We married in 1976 in my parents' garden, beneath the ancient maple tree where I had set up my first outdoor easel as a child. We established our first home in a small Cambridge apartment where I taught art history at a private academy while developing my own painting style. Thomas composed commissioned pieces while teaching piano to supplement our modest income. We lived simply but richly, surrounding ourselves with books, music, and the creative energy that fueled both our disciplines. Our son Michael arrived in 1979, a serious, observant child whose intensity seemed apparent even in infancy. While most babies responded randomly to stimuli, Michael watched and listened with unusual focus, particularly when Thomas played piano. His tiny hands eventually reached for the keys with deliberate intent rather than casual exploration. When my parents decided to retire to Florida in 1982, they offered us the family home in Millhaven, a gesture honoring both practical considerations and symbolic continuity. The Victorian that had nurtured creativity for 2 generations would now shelter a third. We transformed spaces to suit our needs while preserving the home's essential character. My father's study became Thomas's music room, housing a baby grand, piano where he composed and taught. My mother's teaching parlor became my studio, its northern light ideal for painting. Michael's nursery was established in what had been my childhood bedroom, its built-in bookshelves soon filled with illustrated volumes about music, art, and imagination. Our financial situation remained modest but stable. Thomas commuted to Boston 3 days weekly to fulfill teaching obligations, while I established art classes for local children in our carriage house. The mortgage-free home provided security that allowed us to prioritize creative work over financial advancement, a privilege we never took for granted. Michael's childhood unfolded in this nurturing environment where creativity was both practiced and celebrated daily. He took to the piano with natural facility that impressed even his father. By age 7, he was performing simple recitals for neighbors in our music room. By 12, he was playing Chopin with technical precision that suggested real professional potential. He has genuine talent, Thomas would observe. But more importantly, he has discipline. That will carry him forward if music becomes his choice. The emphasis on choice was deliberate. Despite recognizing our son's extraordinary aptitude, we remained conscious of the pressure artistic children often face. We exposed Michael to diverse experiences, sports, science camps, woodworking with a neighbor, ensuring music remained a passion rather than an obligation. As Michael entered adolescence, however, a subtle but significant shift became apparent. The joy that had characterized his early relationship with music gradually transformed into something more calculated. His practice sessions became regimented, his performances technically flawless, but somehow less emotionally connected. He began speaking of competitions, conservatory rankings, and career trajectories with a focus that seemed at odds with the values we had tried to instill. "He's becoming very practical," Thomas observed one evening after Michael had outlined a detailed 10-year career plan that would take him from Juilliard to international concert stages. "I'm not sure whether to celebrate that or worry about it." I recognized in Michael's evolving perspective something foreign to our family values yet quintessentially American, a transformation of art from soulful expression to marketable skill, from personal fulfillment to professional accomplishment. Where Thomas and I saw creativity as intrinsically valuable, Michael increasingly viewed his talent as capital to be strategically invested. This philosophical divergence created no immediate conflict, but planted seeds of future misunderstanding. We continued supporting his musical development while gently emphasizing the emotional core of artistic expression. Michael humored these conversations while privately pursuing his more structured approach to creative achievement. The pivotal tragedy in our family story arrived without warning in 1999, when Thomas suffered a fatal heart attack while conducting a university orchestra during rehearsal of his newest composition. At 52, my husband left behind a body of work that had earned critical respect, if not widespread recognition, a devoted circle of students and colleagues, and a family suddenly adrift without his gentle wisdom. Michael, then 20, and in his second year at the New England Conservatory, responded to his father's death with stoic determination rather than visible grief. He completed his semester without interruption, returned home only briefly to help arrange the memorial service, and spoke of Thomas's legacy primarily in terms of professional accomplishments rather than personal impact. "Dad established a respectable position in contemporary classical composition," he said during the memorial, his words technically accurate, but missing the essence of the man they described. Absent was any mention of Thomas's belief that music existed to connect human hearts, rather than advance careers, his habit of stopping mid-walk to listen to bird songs he would later incorporate into compositions, his absolute conviction that creation mattered more than recognition. In my grief, I recognized that Michael had become fundamentally different from his father, not better or worse, but operating from an entirely different set of values. Where Thomas had viewed art as spiritual practice, Michael saw it as professional pursuit. The divergence that had begun in adolescence was now complete. The years following Thomas's death brought further evolution in our separate paths. Michael graduated with honors and secured a position with the Boston Symphony Orchestra while building a soloist reputation through carefully selected performances. He married Audrey, a corporate attorney whose analytical mind and organizational skills complemented his career ambitions. They purchased a luxury condominium in Boston's Seaport District, its minimalist design and harbor views featuring prominently in his professional biography. Meanwhile, I reinvented my life around the void Thomas had left. I expanded the Carriage House Studio into a small community art center offering classes for everyone from preschoolers to seniors. I established the Thomas Bennett Memorial Scholarship for young composers from underprivileged backgrounds. Most significantly, I returned to serious painting for the first time since Michael's birth, producing a series exploring grief, memory, and resilience that received unexpected critical attention from Boston galleries. Our family home remained the center of my world, not as a shrine to the past, but as a living embodiment of our creative heritage. Thomas's music room preserved his piano and manuscripts while hosting community recitals by local students. The gardens where 3 generations had sought inspiration continued providing sanctuary for both personal reflection and outdoor painting classes during summer months. Michael and Audrey visited occasionally, their brief stays characterized by growing disconnection from the home's history and purpose. They seemed uncomfortable with its weathered charm, its walls crowded with artwork accumulated across generations, its spaces designed for contemplation rather than efficiency. "You're rattling around in this enormous house, Mom," became Michael's regular observation. "The maintenance alone must be overwhelming. Wouldn't you prefer something more manageable?" I understood the practical concerns behind his questions, but struggled to convey the home's importance beyond its physical dimensions. This wasn't merely a structure requiring upkeep, but the embodiment of our family's creative legacy. A space that continued nurturing artistic development across the community. "This house has purpose beyond sheltering me," I would explain. "It's where I teach, create, and continue your father's legacy through the scholarship program. It's alive with creativity in a way apartment living couldn't replicate." Michael would nod with the patient expression of someone humoring an irrational attachment, his focus remaining on practical considerations of heating costs, roof repairs, and yard maintenance. Audrey would reinforce his concerns with comments about senior living communities their clients had found absolutely transformative. I recognized the genuine concern behind their suggestions, but also the fundamental misunderstanding of what constituted quality of life in my worldview. For them, practical comfort and convenience represented obvious priorities for someone in her 70s. For me, purpose, creative engagement, and continuation of our family's artistic legacy far outweighed considerations of easier maintenance or modern amenities. This philosophical divide persisted through increasingly frequent conversations about my future plans. Each visit included subtle references to friends' parents who had made the transition to retirement communities, statistics about falls in multi-story homes, and brochures for senior living options that mysteriously appeared on my coffee table. After their departures, I deflected these suggestions with humor and gentle redirection until November 2022, when Michael and Audrey arrived for their pre-Thanksgiving visit with unusual determination. The moment they entered the foyer, I sensed a shift in their approach, a new urgency that suggested this conversation would differ from previous ones. "Mom," Michael began after barely removing his coat, "we need to discuss something important. Audrey and I have found the perfect solution for your situation." The word situation immediately raised my defenses. My life wasn't a situation to be solved, but a continuing journey to be lived. Nevertheless, I invited them into the kitchen where I'd been preparing cranberry bread, offering tea and attempting to establish the warm atmosphere that had once characterized our family discussions. Audrey declined refreshments, opening her leather portfolio instead. "Eleanor, we've secured an opening at Ocean View Gardens," she announced, her attorney's voice projecting professional certainty. "It's the premier senior living community in Rhode Island, with comprehensive care options, cultural programming, and security that this house simply cannot provide." "We've already placed a deposit to hold your apartment," Michael added, sliding brochures across the counter. "They rarely have openings, especially before the holidays. We acted quickly to ensure you wouldn't miss this opportunity." I stared at the glossy materials, featuring smiling seniors engaged in watercolor classes, notably less sophisticated than what I taught weekly in my own studio. "You put down a deposit without discussing it with me first." "We've been discussing this for years, Mom," Michael replied with barely concealed impatience. "You've just never been ready to take the necessary steps. Sometimes children need to help parents make difficult transitions." "The apartment has a lovely view of the garden courtyard," Audrey continued, displaying floor plans of a space approximately 1/8 the size of my current home. "There's even a small alcove where you could set up an easel for hobby painting." Hobby painting. The phrase struck me like a physical blow. My recent series on grief and memory had been featured in 3 respected galleries. My community art program served over 60 students weekly. Yet my professional artistic practice had been reduced to a hobby that required an alcove rather than a studio. "What about my students?" I asked. "The scholarship program? The community recitals we host in the music room?" Michael sighed with exaggerated patience. "Mom, you're 70. It's time to scale back these commitments and focus on your own needs. The foundation can continue without physical ties to this house. Your father established the foundation specifically to operate from this home," I reminded him. "The connection to his teaching space was central to its purpose." "Dad would understand. Practical necessities," Michael countered. "Times change, and arrangements need to evolve." Audrey glanced at her watch, clearly expecting this discussion to have concluded more efficiently. "We've arranged for a tour tomorrow morning. The moving company is available the week after Thanksgiving. We can handle sorting through what will fit in the new apartment while you're getting acquainted with the facility." The casual dismissal of 70 years of accumulated life, my paintings, Thomas's compositions, generations of family treasures, as items to be sorted through by others, ignited something beyond mere disagreement. This wasn't a proposal, but a coup, executed with corporate efficiency against what they perceived as irrational resistance to inevitable change. I noticed several stacked suitcases in the hallway that I hadn't seen them bring in. "What are those?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your things are already packed, Mom," Michael declared. "The retirement community has an opening, and we've already put down the deposit. It's time to be realistic. The rehearsed phrases and prepared." Materials made clear this intervention had been planned with meticulous detail. The timing before Thanksgiving wasn't coincidental but strategic. They'd have an extended weekend to facilitate my transition before returning to their busy professional lives. The matter neatly resolved before Christmas. I took a deep breath. Recognizing this moment required careful response rather than impulsive reaction. "I appreciate your concern for my welfare," I said with deliberate calm. "I understand these arrangements represent significant effort on your part. I'd like some time to review the materials and process this proposal. Perhaps we could continue this discussion tomorrow after I've had a chance to consider everything." Carefully. My reasonable tone appeared to surprise them. They had clearly anticipated stronger resistance. Michael nodded with visible relief. "That's fair. Take tonight to think it through. The tour is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning." As they carried their overnight bags to their old bedrooms upstairs, I remained in the kitchen, hands trembling, slightly as I processed what had just transpired. The home that had nurtured 4 generations of creativity, the center of Thomas's legacy and my continuing artistic practice, had been reduced to an obsolete dwelling inappropriate for someone of my age. My life's work had been classified as commitments to be scaled back, rather than meaningful contributions to continue. Most disturbingly, my autonomy had been undermined with the absolute conviction that they were acting in my best interest, the benevolent overriding of an elderly parent's irrational attachment to an impractical lifestyle. As evening settled, over the house that had sheltered my family for nearly 120 years, I faced the most significant decision of my later life: surrender to their well-intentioned but fundamentally misguided intervention, or find another path that would preserve both my independence and Thomas's legacy. The solution came to me as I sat in Thomas's music room, my fingers resting lightly on the keys of his beloved Steinway. The Thomas Bennett Foundation for Musical Arts, established after his death to support young composers, had operated from this house for over 20 years. Its board of directors, colleagues, former students, and arts advocates who had genuinely understood Thomas's vision, had often discussed expanding its programming but lacked appropriate space for growth. With sudden clarity, I saw the path forward. Not a defensive rejection of change, but a transformative reimagining of purpose that would honor both the past and future. I spent the next several hours making phone calls to key contacts, reviewing legal documents Thomas and I had established years earlier, and finally, crafting a letter that would forever alter my relationship with my son, but preserve everything that truly mattered. As midnight approached, I placed the sealed envelope on the dining room table, alongside legal documents transferring ownership of the historic home to the Thomas Bennett Foundation for Musical Arts. The transfer, prepared months earlier as part of my estate planning but now executed immediately, included provisions for converting the main house into a community arts center, while transforming the already renovated carriage house into a comfortable residence where I would continue living as the Foundation's Director Emerita. The letter explained my decision in terms I hoped Michael might eventually understand, not as rejection of his concern, but as commitment to values his father and I had spent our lives upholding. The home would fulfill its highest purpose not as a real estate asset to be liquidated, but as a living center for creativity that would benefit generations of aspiring artists. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt not anger, but profound sadness that Michael could not see what seemed so clear to me. That meaning derived not from practical convenience, but from purposeful contribution. That legacy consisted not of financial assets, but of sustained creative impact. The Thomas Bennett Center for the Arts would stand as testament to values Michael had somehow missed, despite growing up surrounded by them. Perhaps someday he would understand that my decision this night represented not stubborn resistance to practical concerns, but faithful stewardship of principles worth preserving. What I could not anticipate was how this decision would eventually transform not just the house's future but my relationship with my son in ways neither of us could imagine that November night as he slept in his childhood bedroom, confident that tomorrow would proceed according to his carefully arranged plan. Morning light filtered through the stained glass transom above Thomas's music room, casting prismatic patterns across the polished wood floor, a daily light show that had captivated 3 generations of our family. I had slept surprisingly well considering the magnitude of the decision I'd made, perhaps because for the first time in months, uncertainty had been replaced by clarity of purpose. I heard movement upstairs as Michael and Audrey began their day, their muffled voices carrying the efficient cadence of people with a schedule to maintain. Today was to be my transition day, their corporate euphemism for uprooting me from my home of nearly 40 years and installing me in a facility where my existence could be managed more conveniently. I prepared breakfast as I had during their childhood visits. Fresh coffee, homemade cranberry scones, and the local blackberry jam Michael had always favored. The familiar routine felt like a final performance of a role I'd played for decades, the mother whose primary purpose was nurturing others. By the time they came downstairs, the table was set with Thomas's grandmother's blue willow china, a deliberate choice that emphasized the generations of family history embedded in this house. "Good morning, Mom," Michael said, his tone betraying surprise at the traditional breakfast spread. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble. We could have picked up something on the way to Ocean View." "I wanted to," I replied simply. "Some rituals matter, especially during transitions." He nodded, missing the double meaning in my words as he helped himself to coffee. Audrey joined us moments later, already dressed in a tailored pantsuit appropriate for business meetings rather than family gatherings, her phone in hand as she checked messages. "We should leave by 9:30, she noted without looking up. "The admissions director is making a special accommodation to meet us on a Saturday morning." "Of course," I agreed placidly, pouring her coffee. "But let's enjoy breakfast first. These may be the last scones I bake in this kitchen." My calm acceptance seemed to relieve them both. The tension that had filled the house since their arrival eased slightly as they interpreted my cooperative demeanor as surrender rather than the strategic composure it actually was. We ate in relative quiet, the conversation limited to practical matters about the upcoming tour and what personal items might fit in the retirement apartment. "Have you thought about what furniture you'd like to bring?" Audrey asked, her legal mind already cataloging assets. "The apartment dimensions allow for a few select pieces, perhaps your reading chair or a small writing desk." "I've made some decisions about my belongings," I confirmed truthfully. "Everything has been arranged." As breakfast concluded, Michael glanced at his watch. "We should get going. The tour is scheduled for 10, and traffic can be unpredictable on Route 1. Before we leave, there's something on the dining room table I'd like you both to see," I said, standing to clear the breakfast dishes with deliberate calm. "Some paperwork I've prepared regarding my arrangements." They exchanged glances, likely assuming I'd prepared a list of personal items to be transferred to Ocean View Gardens. We moved to the formal dining room where generations of family celebrations had unfolded beneath the crystal chandelier my grandfather had installed in 1903. The envelope and legal documents sat precisely where I'd placed them the night before, centered on the polished mahogany surface. Michael reached for them with casual confidence. "Great. This will help us organize the moving process." His words halted abruptly as he opened the envelope and began reading my carefully crafted letter. I watched his expression transform from casual certainty to confusion to dawning comprehension as the full implications of my decision became clear. "Mom, what is this?" he finally asked, his voice hollow with shock. "You've transferred ownership of the house to Dad's foundation? Without discussing it with us?" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "Just as you arranged my move to Ocean View without meaningful discussion with me." Audrey took the papers from Michael's unresisting hands, her attorney's eyes rapidly scanning the legal language with professional assessment. "This appears to be a completed transfer of property," she confirmed, her voice precise despite her evident surprise. "Along with residential rights to the carriage house for the duration of your lifetime." "The paperwork was prepared months ago as part of my estate planning," I explained. "I simply moved the execution date forward in light of yesterday's developments." Michael stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "You can't do this. The house is worth well over $1 million in today's market. This is our family legacy." "Exactly," I interrupted gently. "A legacy of creativity and artistic nurturing that deserves to continue. The Thomas Bennett Center for the Arts will ensure that happens, providing space for community classes, performances, and the scholarship program your father valued so deeply." "But that's not what we discussed," he stammered, genuine bewilderment in his voice. He truly couldn't comprehend that I had subverted his careful plans with equally careful counter-planning of my own. "We haven't had any real discussion, Michael," I corrected him. "You've been telling me what will happen rather than exploring what should happen. There's a significant difference." Audrey, ever the pragmatist, was already considering legal angles. "These documents would need to be properly filed with the county registry to be valid. We could potentially challenge—" "They were filed electronically at 7:15 this morning," I informed her calmly. "Jeffrey Simmons, you remember my friend who practices real estate law? Arranged everything. The transfer is complete and legally binding." The shock in their faces might have been comical under different circumstances. Their elderly mother, who they had assumed would comply with their efficient plans for her remaining years, had outmaneuvered them with her own legal strategy. The competence they had questioned was now demonstrated in the most consequential way possible. Michael found his voice again, anger now replacing confusion. "This is spiteful, Mom. We were trying to help you, to ensure you had proper care as you age, and you respond by giving away our inheritance?" The accusation revealed so much about the gulf between our values, his immediate framing of the house as inheritance, rather than as the living, breathing creative space it had always been. In his eyes, the Victorian that had nurtured 4 generations of artists had been reduced to a financial asset awaiting liquidation upon my death. "This isn't spite, Michael," I responded, keeping my voice gentle despite the hurt his words caused. "It's stewardship. The house was never meant to be sold and its proceeds divided like common property. It was meant to nurture creativity, just as it did for you throughout your childhood." That's sentimental nonsense," he sputtered, his composer's eloquence deserting him in the face of thwarted plans. "Real estate doesn't have purpose beyond its economic value. What matters is ensuring your proper care, not preserving some romanticized notion of creative space." His words struck at the heart of our fundamental disconnect. To Michael, my decision represented irrational sentimentality obstructing practical planning. To me, his perspective revealed a profound misunderstanding of what constituted true value, of how meaning derived from purpose rather than economic calculation. "The carriage house has been fully renovated," I explained, maintaining my calm in the face of his growing agitation. "I'll have a comfortable apartment there with studio space and easy access to the gardens. The foundation will provide maintenance and security while I continue teaching and painting. My physical needs are thoroughly addressed while preserving my sense of purpose and contribution." "But it's not professional care," he objected. "What happens when you need assistance with daily activities? When mobility becomes more challenging?" "Ocean View has trained staff available 24 hours a day. The Foundation Board has approved a budget for home health assistance when needed," I countered. "Jenny Martinez from the local agency has already agreed to provide regular wellness checks, expanding to more comprehensive care as necessary. Many people age successfully at home with appropriate support, Michael. It's not residential care. That ensures well-being, but purpose and community connection." Audrey, ever strategic, shifted to a different approach. The Foundation's board would need to have approved this arrangement. There wasn't time for a formal meeting since yesterday. "The Executive committee held an emergency session via conference call last night, I replied. The full board will ratify their decision next week, but the preliminary approval was unanimous. They've been discussing expanded programming for years. This provides the perfect opportunity to realize those plans. I watched understanding dawn. On their faces, this hadn't been an impulsive reaction but a carefully considered alternative plan, developed with professional guidance and institutional support. The irrational attachment they had dismissed was in fact a commitment to values shared by an entire community of artists, educators, and arts advocates who recognized the home's significance beyond its real estate value. Michael stood abruptly, pacing the dining room with agitated energy. I can't believe you've done this without even attempting to understand our concerns. We've spent months researching appropriate facilities, finding the best possible arrangement for your care. All that effort, completely dismissed because you can't let go of this old house. I understand your concerns perfectly, I corrected him. I simply don't share your assessment of what constitutes appropriate care for someone in my position. You see physical safety and medical supervision as the primary considerations. I see purpose, creative engagement, and community connection as equally essential to well-being at any age. Audrey checked her watch, a habitual gesture that seemed particularly tone-deaf in the context of this life-altering conversation. The Ocean View appointment is in 20 minutes. We should call to cancel. Yes, I agreed. And you might want to contact the moving company as well. Their services won't be needed. Michael stopped his pacing to stare at me, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something approaching reluctant admiration. You planned this all along, didn't you? You knew we were coming to finalize arrangements and you were ready with this countermove. Not exactly, I admitted. I've had the legal framework prepared for months as part of estate planning, but I hadn't intended to execute it immediately. Your announcement yesterday that my belongings were already packed accelerated the timeline. He flinched slightly at the reminder of their presumptuous action. We were trying to make the transition easier. By removing my agency entirely, I noted, treating me as someone to be managed rather than consulted. That approach forced a more decisive response than might otherwise have been necessary. The room fell silent as the full implications settled over us. The carefully orchestrated weekend they had planned, the Ocean View tour, the sorting of my possessions, the efficient dismantling of my independent life had been completely derailed. What would normally have been the beginning of Thanksgiving preparations instead marked a fundamental realignment of power and expectations. So what happens now? Audrey finally asked, her professional demeanor reasserting itself as she processed this new reality. That depends on you, I replied honestly. The legal arrangements are complete, but how we proceed as a family remains open. You're welcome to stay for the weekend as planned. We could use the time to discuss how this new arrangement will work and how you might choose to be involved with the center's development. Michael shook his head in disbelief. You expect us to just accept this dramatic change of plans and continue with a normal family weekend? I expect nothing, I clarified. I'm offering an opportunity to begin adapting to a different future than the one you had envisioned, just as you were asking me to do yesterday. The parallel wasn't lost on him, though he clearly found it difficult to accept the reversal of positions. His carefully controlled world had been upended, his authority as the practical, responsible child undermined by his supposedly vulnerable mother. I need some air, he announced abruptly, heading for the front door without waiting for response. The heavy oak door closed behind him with restrained force, not quite a slam, but certainly not a gentle exit. Audrey remained, her legal mind visibly reassessing the situation in light of this unexpected development. The foundation is a legitimate 501c3? She asked after a moment. Fully compliant since its establishment following Thomas's death, I confirmed. All appropriate filings and annual reports maintained by Peterson and Associates. She nodded. professional respect briefly overriding personal frustration. And the board structure? You mentioned an executive committee. 7 voting members plus the director, predominantly colleagues from Thomas's academic career and respected arts. Administrators, the bylaws prevent any single individual from controlling decisions. I'll transition to emeritus status on the board, retaining input but limited voting rights to ensure proper oversight. My detailed responses seemed to satisfy something in her analytical mind. Whatever her personal feelings about my decision, she recognized it had been executed with professional thoroughness rather than emotional impulse. "You've been planning this for some time," she observed, not as accusation, but as assessment. "Planning for appropriate transition, yes," I acknowledged. "Not specifically as countermeasure to your retirement community arrangements, but as thoughtful stewardship of both the property and Thomas's legacy." She gathered the documents, arranging them in a neat stack with habitual precision. "I should call Ocean View to cancel the appointment, and the moving company." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I appreciate your handling those details." As she stepped into the hallway to make the calls, I remained at the dining table, my fingers tracing the wood grain polished by generations of family meals and celebrations. The immediate crisis had passed, but the long-term implications for our family relationships remained uncertain. I had preserved my independence and the house's creative purpose, but at what cost to my connection with my son? Michael returned nearly an hour later, his expression more composed though still troubled. He found me in the studio portion of the carriage house where I was reviewing renovation plans with an eye toward adapting the space for my permanent residence. "The carriage house will really be your apartment?" he asked from the doorway, his tone somewhere between curiosity and lingering disbelief. "Yes," I confirmed, gesturing for him to enter. "Come see what we've done with it." The conversion began 3 years ago as expanded classroom space, but we always included a residential component for visiting artists. It's approximately 800 square feet, smaller than the main house but substantially larger than the Ocean View apartment. He stepped inside, his musician's eye taking in the high ceilings, abundant natural light, and carefully planned accessibility features that didn't compromise the space's historical character. A compact kitchen occupied one corner, with a comfortable living area, separate bedroom, and full bathroom completing the residential portion. The remainder consisted of open studio space with excellent northern light, ideal for both teaching and my personal artistic practice. "It's not what I expected," he admitted reluctantly. "I've never really seen the carriage house since the renovation." "Most of your visits have been brief," I observed without accusation. "There hasn't been much opportunity to show you the changes we've made to the property." He wandered the space, examining features with growing comprehension. The grab bars in the bathroom were disguised as decorative towel rails. The kitchen counters were installed at accessible height without appearing institutional. The shower included a bench and handheld sprayer that would accommodate decreased mobility while maintaining aesthetic appeal. "These are all accessibility modifications," he realized aloud. "You've been planning for aging in place." "Of course," I confirmed. "I've understood for years that maintaining independence would eventually require adaptations. The foundation has approached this systematically, incorporating universal design principles throughout the property renovations." His expression registered surprise that gradually shifted towards something resembling shame. "You've been planning, more comprehensively than we realized." "I've had excellent advisors," I acknowledged. "Both professional consultants and friends who have navigated similar transitions. The Foundation Board includes several members in their 70s and 80s who understand these considerations from personal experience." Michael sat on the window seat overlooking the garden, his composer's hands restless in his lap. "I still believe a professional facility would provide better security and medical supervision," he said finally, though with less certainty than before. "That's a legitimate perspective," I conceded. Different approaches work for different people. The critical factor isn't which model of care, but whether the person's needs and values are both addressed in the arrangement. And your values require continued involvement with the foundation and teaching program, he stated rather than asked, finally acknowledging what I had been trying to explain for months. Yes. Purpose and contribution remain essential to my well-being, I confirmed. The physical support Ocean View offers wouldn't compensate for the loss of meaningful engagement. We sat in silence for several moments, the November sunlight warming the wooden floors and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air between us, a visual representation of the suspended particles of misunderstanding that had accumulated over decades. "I'm still upset about how you handled this," he finally said. "Making such a significant decision without consulting me feels disrespectful of my concern for your welfare." The irony of his statement hung between us. His identical approach to my care had prompted my unilateral action. Rather than pointing this out directly, I chose a gentler response. "I understand," I said quietly. "It's difficult when someone we care about makes choices different from what we believe is best for them. Both of us are experiencing that discomfort, right now, from opposite perspectives." He absorbed this parallel, his expression suggesting reluctant recognition of its accuracy. "Audrey has canceled the Ocean View appointment," he said after another silence, "and the moving company." "Thanks. You," I responded simply. "What are your plans now? Will you stay for the weekend as originally intended?" The question represented more than immediate logistics. It asked whether we would attempt to navigate this new reality together or retreat to separate corners to nurse our respective grievances. Michael seemed to recognize the significance of the moment, weighing his response carefully. "I think we should stay," he decided. "There's clearly much more we need to discuss about how this arrangement will work practically. And it is Thanksgiving weekend, after all." The concession, however, grudging, offered a foundation for rebuilding. Not agreement, certainly, but willingness to engage rather than withdraw completely. "I'd like that," I said sincerely. "Perhaps tomorrow you might meet some of the foundation board members who live locally. Understanding their vision for the center might help clarify why this approach makes sense for everyone involved." He nodded without enthusiasm, but also without rejection. Progress of a sort. "I should find Audrey. Let her know we're staying." As he rose to leave, his gaze caught on a painting propped against the far wall, one of my recent works exploring memory and legacy through the metaphor of light, moving through the main house's distinctive architecture. His expression softened slightly as he studied it. "Is this new?" he asked. "I don't remember seeing it before." "From last winter's series," I confirmed. "It's scheduled for the gallery show in Boston next month." He moved closer to examine it, his attention shifting from cursory acknowledgement to genuine engagement with the work. "You've captured the light from the music room transom perfectly, the way it refracts across the floor in the afternoon. I remember watching that as a child while practicing piano. The observation, so specific, so connected to actual lived experience in the house, caught me by surprise. Perhaps the emotional impact of our confrontation had momentarily stripped away the professional detachment that typically characterized his approach to art, allowing the child who had grown up surrounded by creativity to briefly reemerge. "That particular light pattern has fascinated 3 generations of our family," I said softly. "Your grandfather installed that transom specifically to create that effect during afternoon practice sessions." For a fleeting moment, something shifted in Michael's expression, a recognition of connection to something larger than himself, a lineage of creativity that transcended individual lives. Then his professional mask returned, the vulnerability tucked away beneath practiced composure. "The technique is impressive," he observed in more measured tones. "The gallery show should be well received." The moment had passed, but its brief existence offered hope that beneath the practical, career-focused exterior Michael had developed, some appreciation for the intangible values that had shaped his childhood might still remain accessible. Remainder of the day unfolded in an uneasy truce. Audrey busied herself with work emails, creating a professional buffer between herself and the family drama. Michael alternated between subdued conversation and long walks around the property, perhaps seeing it with fresh eyes now that its future had been decided without his input. I continued quiet preparations for Thanksgiving, maintaining normalcy, as best I could while allowing appropriate space for adjustment. That evening, as we gathered for a simple dinner in the kitchen rather than the more formal dining room, Michael finally asked the question that had likely been troubling him throughout the day. "What made you decide to do this now?" he inquired as we finished our meal. "You mentioned having the paperwork prepared for months. Why execute it immediately rather than discussing alternatives?" The question deserved a thoughtful response. Not justification, but honest explanation of the reasoning behind what must have seemed a drastic action from his perspective. "When you announced that my belongings were already packed," I began carefully, "it represented a fundamental breach of trust. Not just practical arrangements made without consultation, but the clear message that my agency in my own life was considered optional, something to be overridden when convenient." He flinched slightly at the assessment but didn't interrupt. "That required an equally definitive response," I continued. "Not out of anger or retaliation, but to establish unmistakable boundaries. Half measures or additional discussions would likely have resulted in further well-intentioned but fundamentally disrespectful interventions." "We weren't trying to disrespect you," he objected. "We were trying to help with a transition we genuinely believe is in your best interest." "I understand your intentions," I acknowledged, "but intention doesn't negate impact. Being treated as someone whose home could be packed up without their participation was profoundly disturbing, regardless of the motivations behind it." Audrey, who had remained largely silent throughout dinner, finally joined the conversation. "From a legal perspective, you've created a rather elegant solution," she admitted with professional respect, if not personal agreement. "The foundation structure protects the property from future challenges while ensuring your continued residence and purpose. It's actually quite similar to certain estate planning arrangements we recommend to clients with significant historical properties." Her acknowledgement of the plan's legitimacy seemed to soften Michael's stance slightly. If his attorney wife recognized the arrangement as professionally sound rather than merely emotional reaction, perhaps it deserved more serious consideration than he had initially granted. "I still believe more structured care would be safer," he maintained, though with less certainty than before. "But I can acknowledge that this approach addresses aspects of your well-being we may have undervalued in our planning." It wasn't acceptance exactly, more a reluctant acknowledgement that my perspective might contain validity alongside his own. Still, it represented progress from the shocked anger of the morning toward something approaching mutual respect. "Safety takes many forms," I observed gently. "Physical security matters, certainly, but so does emotional well-being, sense of purpose, and continuation of life's meaningful work. Different people balance these considerations differently as they age." We cleared dishes together in a domestic routine that echoed countless family evenings throughout the decades, the familiar choreography of loading the dishwasher and storing leftovers, providing comfortable structure amid uncomfortable emotions. As Michael dried the last serving bowl, his father's favorite for winter stews, he paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Would you show me the plans for the Arts Center?" he asked, the request clearly difficult for him. "If this is really happening, I should understand what you envision for the property." The question represented significant concession, not acceptance, but willingness to engage with the reality I had established, rather than continuing to reject it outright. I recognized the effort this required and responded accordingly. "I'd be happy to," I said warmly. The board has developed quite comprehensive proposals for expanding both the physical spaces and programming. Your father would have been delighted with their vision. We settled in the living room with the portfolio of architectural renderings and program descriptions the foundation had developed over preceding months. As I explained the careful balance of preservation and adaptation that would transform our family home into a vibrant community arts center while maintaining its historical character, I watched Michael's expression gradually shift from reluctant attention to genuine engagement. "The music room will remain essentially unchanged?" he asked, studying the floor plans. "Absolutely," I confirmed. "It will continue hosting student recitals and small chamber performances. The acoustics are too perfect to modify. We're simply updating the electrical systems and improving accessibility with a discreet ramp at the garden entrance." He nodded with apparent approval. "And teaching spaces?" "The formal dining room will become a classroom for music theory and composition. The library remains a reading room, but with expanded collections focused on arts education. The upstairs bedrooms will be converted to individual practice rooms and multimedia studios for digital arts programming." As we reviewed each aspect of the planned transformation, I observed subtle changes in Michael's demeanor. Professional appreciation for the thoroughness of the planning, grudging recognition that the approach honored the property's significance. Rather than discarding it, perhaps even faint stirrings of connection to the creative legacy he had distanced himself from in pursuit of practical success. "The board has asked if you might consider presenting a master class when the center officially opens next spring," I mentioned tentatively. "Your reputation as both performer and instructor would lend significant credibility to the inaugural programming." The invitation clearly surprised him. "They want me involved? Even after this situation?" "Of course," I assured him. "This isn't about excluding family, but about expanding community access to arts education. Your professional expertise would be tremendously valuable to advanced students. The foundation has always hoped you might eventually connect with its mission in ways that complement your performance career." Something shifted in his expression, perhaps recognition that this transformation didn't necessitate his exclusion, but actually created new possibilities for engagement aligned with his professional identity. The center might represent continuation of his father's legacy in ways that acknowledged his own development, rather than demanding return to childhood values he had outgrown. "I'd need to check my performance schedule," he said cautiously. "But a master class might be possible. Perhaps a small recital as well, if the programming would benefit." This tentative offer of professional participation represented the first constructive engagement with the new reality. Neither full acceptance nor continued rejection, but willingness to explore potential connection on terms consistent with his adult identity. "That would be wonderful," I responded, careful not to overstate my enthusiasm and risk triggering retreat. "The board would be delighted to work around your availability." As we continued reviewing plans late into the evening, I found myself reflecting on the day's dramatic evolution. From the shocking confrontation of the morning through anger and adjustment, to this cautious exploration of how our relationship might reconfigure around the new circumstances. Not healed, certainly, perhaps not even reconciled in any meaningful sense, but at least engaged in genuine dialogue rather than parallel monologues about incompatible visions. When Michael finally rose to retire for the night, he paused at the living room doorway, his expression thoughtful. "I still wish you had handled this differently," he said quietly. "But I'm beginning to understand why this place matters to you beyond its practical value. Why you couldn't just walk away from it as we had planned." The acknowledgement, however, limited, represented significant movement from his position 24 hours earlier. Not agreement with my decision, but recognition of the values that had informed it. Values his father and I had attempted to instill throughout his childhood. "Thank you for being willing to listen," I replied simply. "That's all I've really wanted, for my perspective to be considered alongside practical concerns, rather than dismissed as mere sentimentality." He nodded, the gesture neither commitment nor rejection, but something more valuable in that moment. Acknowledgement of legitimate difference rather than hierarchical evaluation of whose judgment should prevail. "Good night, Mom," he said finally. "We'll talk more tomorrow." As he ascended the stairs to his childhood bedroom, I remained in the living room, surrounded by the plans for transformation that had so dramatically altered our family trajectory. The Thomas Bennett Center for the Arts would proceed regardless of Michael's level of engagement, but his tentative willingness to connect with its mission offered hope that our relationship might eventually find new footing rather than fracturing permanently along the fault lines of our differing values. What I could not have anticipated then was how this confrontation, painful and disruptive as it had been, would ultimately catalyze profound reconsideration of priorities and perspectives for both of us in the months ahead. The farewell letter I had left on the dining room table, intended as final statement of boundaries and values, would eventually prove not an ending, but the beginning of an unexpected journey toward mutual understanding. Thanksgiving. Eve dawned, with tentative sunlight filtering through lingering clouds, a fitting metaphor for the cautious detente that had emerged in our household. The immediate crisis had passed, leaving us in uncertain territory, neither fully reconciled nor overtly hostile. I rose early, my lifelong habit of greeting dawn with creativity drawing me to the studio space. Painting had always provided clarity when words failed. I lost myself in the work until movement in the main house's kitchen window caught my attention. Michael preparing coffee, his silhouette so like his father's that my heart contracted with bittersweet recognition. As I entered through the garden door, Michael looked up, his expression guarded but not hostile. "You've been painting," he observed, noting the smudges of blue on my hands. "Morning light is too precious to waste," I replied, with a small smile. "Some habits persist regardless of circumstances." He nodded, then extended an unexpected olive branch in the form of Thomas's favorite ceramic mug. "Coffee?" "Thank you." I accepted both coffee and gesture as Audrey joined us, already dressed in business attire despite the holiday. "I've been reviewing the Foundation's bylaws," she announced without preamble. "The governance structure is quite thorough. You've had excellent legal guidance. The provisions for your continued residence are particularly well crafted," she observed with professional respect. "Lifetime rights without creating tax complications or governance conflicts. Quite elegant." Her assessment represented significant validation. The arrangement she and Michael had dismissed as sentimental attachment was being recognized as legally sophisticated and professionally sound. Michael seemed less comfortable with this acknowledgement of my planning capabilities. "The legal structure may be sound," he conceded grudgingly, "but practical challenges remain. The maintenance requirements alone for a building this age are substantial. The Foundation has maintained a capital reserve fund since its inception," I explained. "Thomas insisted on responsible financial planning. We've systematically addressed major systems over the past decade. The renovation budget is fully funded through existing reserves and committed donor support." My detailed response clearly surprised him. The mother he had perceived as needing protection had been managing substantial responsibilities all along, just outside his limited awareness of my actual activities. "I didn't realize the Foundation had that level of financial infrastructure," he admitted reluctantly. "There's much about my life you haven't had occasion to observe," I noted without accusation. "Our visits have been brief and infrequent in recent years." The observation hung between us, a gentle reminder that his assessment of my capabilities had been based on incomplete information, assumptions filled with his own projections, rather than actual understanding of my daily existence. Audrey redirected the conversation. "The immediate question is how to proceed from here. Our original plans obviously require adjustment." "I'd still very much like to celebrate Thanksgiving tomorrow," I suggested. "Several Foundation board members and their families traditionally join me for dinner. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet them in a casual setting." Michael's expression suggested mixed feelings about this proposal, yet awareness that immediate departure would only deepen our rift. "We'll stay through Thanksgiving," he decided finally. "It would be useful to meet the board members." His framing, practical assessment rather than emotional reconnection, was characteristic, but the willingness to engage represented significant movement from his initial shocked rejection. "I typically prepare most dishes today," I said. "Would you like to help as you used to when you were younger? Your apple cranberry stuffing was always Thomas's favorite." Michael hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining emotional distance and accepting this small step toward normalcy. "I suppose I could handle the stuffing," he conceded, "though I'm not sure I remember the exact recipe." "It's in your father's recipe journal," I assured him. "He insisted on documenting your creation." "Precisely." Something flickered across Michael's face, a brief softening that suggested emotional accessibility beneath his carefully maintained professional composure. "Dad and his documentation systems," he murmured. "Everything cataloged and preserved." It served him well in composition, I observed, and the habit transferred to other aspects of life he valued. This gentle reminder that Thomas's meticulous nature, a characteristic Michael had inherited, had been applied to preserving family traditions seemed to resonate. Michael nodded, a gesture that acknowledged connection rather than difference, for perhaps the first time since our confrontation. The morning evolved with careful navigation of this fragile truce. Focus on practical Thanksgiving preparations, providing structure that allowed cautious conversation without demanding direct confrontation of our profound differences. As we reviewed recipes and planned the following day's meal, the familiar rhythm of holiday preparation gradually eased some of the tension between us. 7 guests plus us makes 10 total, Michael confirmed, reviewing my guest list with the same attention he likely brought to orchestral programming. "Yes," I confirmed. "Margaret and Robert Peterson, colleagues of Thomas at the conservatory. Elena and David Rothstein, she's our education director. Samuel Chen, the architect who designed the center's renovation. And Catherine Williams with her daughters. She's our newest board member, focused on expanding youth programming. All connected to the foundation or Dad's musical circles," he observed neutrally. "Yes," I acknowledged. "They've become my chosen family in many ways since Thomas's passing." After a moment's contemplation, he asked what seemed a casual question but carried deeper significance. "Do they know about the property transfer? About what happened yesterday?" The inquiry revealed legitimate concern about social dynamics, whether tomorrow's gathering would position him as an outsider navigating insiders who had been privy to family conflict. "Margaret and Robert know I've been considering accelerated transfer to prevent potential sale," I explained carefully. "They're aware of your preference for retirement community options, but the specific timing and circumstances of yesterday's events haven't been shared with anyone. That remains private family business." Relief flickered across his features, followed by what appeared to be genuine appreciation for this discretion. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd prefer to meet them without that particular context overshadowing the interaction." He paused in his methodical list-making, pen hovering above paper as he formulated a more personal question than any he had ventured since the confrontation. "Do you understand why I was so certain about Ocean View?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. "Why I still believe, it represents the most responsible approach to your future." The question represented genuine opening rather than rhetorical positioning, an invitation to explore perspectives rather than merely assert positions. "I believe you're genuinely concerned about my physical safety," I acknowledged. "And from a certain perspective, centralized services and professional supervision make perfect logical sense. If physical well-being were the only consideration, your approach would be difficult to challenge." He nodded, seemingly appreciative of this recognition of his intentions. "But you prioritize different factors," he suggested, not disagreeing but seeking deeper understanding. "I prioritize all aspects of well-being: Physical, emotional, creative, spiritual, I clarified. For me, purpose and contribution aren't luxuries, to be sacrificed for safety, but essential components of a life worth continuing. And I've failed to adequately consider what matters most to you, he concluded, reaching something that approached genuine insight rather than merely tactical concession. As I perhaps failed to adequately explain it, I offered generously. These aren't easy conversations for any family to navigate. This mutual acknowledgement of shared responsibility for our communication failure represented significant progress from the accusations and defensiveness of the previous day. When Michael located his childhood stuffing recipe in Thomas's meticulously maintained journal later that afternoon, something shifted in his demeanor as he recognized his father's careful documentation, not just ingredients and proportions, but appreciative notes about his son's culinary innovation. These tangible reminders of being valued seemed to reach him in ways abstract discussions about legacy could not. "Dad really did save everything, didn't he?" he observed, fingers tracing his father's handwriting on the yellowed page. He believed in preserving what mattered, I confirmed gently. From musical compositions to family recipes, documentation was his way of honoring significance. I always focused on his professional accomplishments, Michael admitted. But these personal archives were equally important to him, weren't they? Equally sacred, I agreed. He saw no meaningful division between creative work and family life. Both represented expressions of what he valued most. Before retiring that evening, Michael paused at the door to Thomas's music room, his gaze lingering on the Steinway where he had spent countless childhood hours practicing. Without comment, he entered the space, settling on the bench with the familiarity of muscle memory never truly forgotten. I remained in the hallway, observing without interrupting this private communion with memory. The music that eventually emerged was not from his professional repertoire, but one of Thomas's compositions, a simple, elegant theme his father had created for his 5th birthday, the first piece he had ever learned to play. The melody filled the Victorian with momentary restoration of connection between father and son, past and present, professional accomplishment, and personal meaning. When the final notes faded, Michael remained seated, hands resting quietly on the keys, lost in private reflection. Thanksgiving Day unfolded with surprising ease. As guests arrived, I observed Michael's response to meeting the foundation members. Initial wariness gradually yielded to genuine engagement as professional commonalities emerged. Discussion of acoustic considerations with Samuel, educational philosophy with Catherine, musical interpretation with Margaret and Robert. These interactions revealed dimensions of the Foundation's work that resonated with Michael's professional values, even while operating from different philosophical foundations than his own. The organization he had dismissed as sentimental preservation revealed itself as a sophisticated cultural institution with meaningful community impact. During dinner, conversation flowed more naturally than I had dared hope. Michael's initial reserve gradually softened as he found unexpected connections with people who shared his father's creative values. "Your mother tells me you're performing Schumann's Piano Concerto next season with the Philadelphia Orchestra," Margaret mentioned. Thomas would have been delighted. That piece was particularly meaningful to him. "Dad played it during his graduate recital," Michael acknowledged, his expression warming. "I didn't realize you'd been present for that performance." "Front row," she confirmed with a smile. He was nervous about the third movement transitions, though you'd never have known from the confidence he projected. This casual mention of his father's vulnerability, something absent from Michael's usual professional framing of Thomas's career, seemed to touch something beneath his polished exterior. "He never told me he struggled with that section," he admitted. "When he coached me through it years later, he made it seem effortless." "That was Thomas," Robert interjected warmly. Generous in sharing knowledge but private about his own challenges. He wanted his students focused on possibility rather than limitation. As evening progressed, I noticed Michael engaged in extended conversation with Samuel near the architectural renderings. Their discussion appeared animated yet focused, professional expertise being exchanged with mutual respect. When they eventually rejoined the larger group, Michael's expression suggested intellectual engagement rather than mere polite participation. Samuel has agreed to send me the acoustic specifications for review, he mentioned quietly. There are some interesting challenges with maintaining sound quality while adapting for accessibility. I'd still very much like to celebrate Thanksgiving tomorrow, I suggested. Several Foundation board members and their families traditionally join me for dinner. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet them in a casual setting. Michael's expression suggested mixed feelings about this proposal, yet awareness that immediate departure would only deepen our rift. We'll stay through Thanksgiving, he decided finally. It would be useful to meet the board members. His framing, practical assessment rather than emotional reconnection, was characteristic, but the willingness to engage represented significant movement from his initial shocked rejection. I typically prepare most dishes today, I said. Would you like to help as you used to when you were younger? Your apple cranberry stuffing was always Thomas's favorite. Michael hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining emotional distance and accepting this small step toward normalcy. I suppose I could handle the stuffing, he conceded, though I'm not sure I remember the exact recipe. It's in your father's recipe journal, I assured him. He insisted on documenting your creation. Precisely. Something flickered across Michael's face, a brief softening that suggested emotional accessibility beneath his carefully maintained. That's wonderful, I acknowledged, careful not to overstate my pleasure at this professional engagement. He nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than merely obliging. The Foundation has assembled an impressive team, more sophisticated approach than I had anticipated. Once the house had quieted after our guests departed, the three of us gathered in the kitchen for traditional late-night leftovers. As we assembled turkey sandwiches, Michael finally addressed what had remained largely unspoken throughout the Baisiu day. I'm still not convinced this is the safest option for your future, he began carefully, his tone thoughtful rather than confrontational. But I can acknowledge it's more thoroughly considered than I initially understood. The concession represented significant evolution from his shocked rejection upon discovering the property transfer. Audrey nodded agreement, her analytical mind having clearly reassessed the situation based on direct observation. The Foundation's organizational structure is remarkably sound, she observed, and the board members demonstrate appropriate expertise for their respective roles. Thank you both, I responded simply. I understand we may continue seeing this situation differently, but I appreciate your willingness to engage with the reality rather than simply rejecting it. After deliberate silence, Michael offered what appeared to be genuine rather than merely diplomatic insight. I think I've been viewing creativity and practicality as opposing forces, he admitted, as if choosing one necessitated abandoning the other. But watching you develop this arrangement, and meeting the people implementing it, suggests they can coexist more effectively than I had recognized. The observation revealed deeper processing than I had anticipated. Not merely tactical accommodation to unchangeable circumstances, but genuine reconsideration of underlying assumptions. As the weekend continued, this tentative reconnection gradually strengthened through small, significant interactions. Michael spent several hours reviewing architectural plans with professional attention to acoustic considerations. Audrey engaged with the Foundation's governing documents, offering legal perspective on potential refinements. On their final evening, Michael asked to see the carriage house apartment again, this time with more attention to its actual features rather than comparison to the rejected ocean view option. The bathroom accessibility features are well integrated, he observed, examining the shower design with professional assessment rather than personal judgment. Not institutional looking at all. And the emergency response system, he continued. You mentioned it's being installed next month? Yes, I confirmed. Discrete call buttons in each room, plus wearable option if preferred. Direct connection to both local emergency services and Foundation staff members living nearby. He absorbed this information with evident reassessment of his assumptions about my planning capabilities. The irrational attachment he had dismissed was revealing itself as thoughtfully executed adaptation, supporting continued independence within appropriate safety parameters. As they prepared for final departure the next morning, loading overnight bags into their car, Michael approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. I want you to know that while I still believe Ocean View might offer certain advantages, I respect the thoughtfulness you've brought to this alternative approach. The acknowledgement represented meaningful progress from his initial rejection of my decision as irrational attachment to an impractical dwelling. And I understand your concerns come from genuine care rather than merely controlling impulse, I offered in reciprocal acknowledgement. Different expressions of the same underlying value, ensuring well-being as aging progresses. We'll check in more regularly, he promised as we exchanged farewell embraces. Monthly video calls at minimum, and I'll coordinate spring visits around the center's opening preparations. As their car disappeared down the tree-lined drive, I remained on the porch reflecting on the remarkable evolution of the past 3 days. From the shock of discovering my packed suitcases to this tentative reconnection through shared creative heritage, we had traversed emotional territory I could not have anticipated when writing my farewell letter. 3 months later, on a bright February morning, I stood in the gardens of my carriage house apartment, reviewing renovation progress with Samuel and Catherine when an unexpected visitor arrived. Michael's familiar car appeared in the driveway, his unscheduled visit suggesting news significant enough to warrant personal delivery, rather than our now regular video conversations. He approached with uncharacteristic emotional transparency, his expression suggesting powerful feeling beneath his typically composed exterior. As he reached the garden gate, I noticed he carried a familiar envelope, my farewell letter from that November night, now well worn from apparent repeated reading. "Mom," he began without preamble, his voice thick with emotion I hadn't witnessed since childhood. "I need to tell you something important." I waited, giving him space to find words for whatever revelation had prompted this unexpected visit. He glanced toward the main house where construction crews were implementing the renovation plans he had initially opposed with such certainty. "I've been rereading your letter," he admitted, holding the envelope with surprising gentleness. "Not just once, but many times over these past months. There's a paragraph toward the end that I didn't fully comprehend until recently." He opened the envelope with careful reverence, extracting the letter to locate the specific passage that had apparently catalyzed this visit. "You wrote, 'What matters most isn't where we live out our final chapters, but how we ensure our life's most meaningful work continues beyond our individual participation.' Thomas understood that legacy consists not of financial assets but sustained, creative impact that benefits future generations." He paused, emotion making his usually controlled voice unsteady. "I've been focused entirely on the practical aspects of your aging, medical supervision, physical safety, efficient care delivery. But I missed the essential truth you were trying to communicate about purpose and meaning transcending those considerations." This insight represented far more meaningful connection than I had dared hope for when confronting his presumptuous packing of my belongings. Not merely tolerance of my different choice, but genuine comprehension of the values that had informed it. "Audrey and I have been having extensive conversations about our own future planning," he continued. "About what would truly matter to us in later years, beyond merely physical comfort or convenience. Your letter, your courage in defending what you valued most, it's challenged us to reconsider our own priorities." Tears welled in his eyes, the emotional vulnerability I hadn't witnessed since Thomas's memorial service now fully present. As he reached the heart of his revelation, the center's creation, preserving Dad's legacy while creating new opportunities for young artists. It's exactly what he would have wanted. Not just practical use of property, but meaningful continuation of values. I was so focused on financial assets that I completely missed the more significant inheritance you were protecting. Michael had packed my bags for Thanksgiving, confident. In his assessment of what constituted appropriate care for his elderly mother, my farewell note had made him cry. Not just with immediate shock, but with the gradual, transformative understanding that legacy transcends mere property and true care honors purpose alongside safety. As we stood together reviewing the renovation, plans for what would become the Thomas Bennett Center for the Arts, I realized that my midnight decision had preserved more than just a historic Victorian home. It had created space for both of us to discover that different values need not represent opposition, but can instead offer complementary wisdom when approached with mutual respect. "Mom," Michael said quietly, as workers carefully restored the stained glass transom that had captivated 3 generations of our family, "I'm sorry I tried to pack your life away without truly understanding what mattered most to you. And I'm grateful you've been willing to reconsider rather than simply withdrawing." I responded with equal sincerity. Different perspectives offer richer understanding when we're brave enough to explore. The weeks following Michael's emotional February visit brought unexpected transformation to both our relationship and the Thomas Bennett Center for the Arts. My son's tearful acknowledgement that he had missed the deeper meaning of my decision seemed to release something long constrained within him, allowing genuine engagement with his father's legacy and my creative priorities without abandoning his own practical nature. "I'd like to expand my involvement beyond the opening recital," he announced during our next video call. "Perhaps as artistic advisor for the performance series, I've been discussing possibilities with Catherine." His increasing comfort with the center's development revealed itself through specific, detailed questions rather than general skepticism. "Have we considered recording capabilities in the music room renovation? Modern acoustical treatments could preserve the natural resonance while enabling professional documentation of performances." The shift from "your project" to "we" didn't escape my notice. A subtle but significant evolution in ownership and identification with the center's mission. I embraced this gradual integration without comment, recognizing that drawing attention to it might trigger self-consciousness that could disrupt his natural progression toward meaningful involvement. As April approached, bringing both spring renewal and the center's scheduled opening, construction teams completed renovations with remarkable attention to preserving historical details while incorporating contemporary functionality. The careful balance reflected Samuel's architectural expertise enhanced by Michael's acoustic recommendations, a collaborative approach that honored both preservation and innovation. I relocated permanently to my carriage house apartment in late March, watching with bittersweet satisfaction as the main Victorian transitioned from private dwelling to community cultural space. The physical relocation proved easier than anticipated, perhaps because I had chosen it rather than having it imposed upon me. The spacious studio with its northern light, compact but well-designed living quarters, and direct access to the gardens provided everything essential for both creative work and comfortable daily living. Michael and Audrey arrived a week before the opening celebrations, staying at the boutique inn near the harbor, rather than attempting to reclaim bedrooms now transformed into practice spaces and classrooms. This practical arrangement acknowledged the property's evolution without awkwardness or regret, reality accepted rather than resisted. The morning after their arrival, Michael appeared at my door carrying a carefully wrapped package and wearing an expression that suggested significant personal investment in whatever it contained. "Something for the center," he explained as I welcomed him in. "If you think it's appropriate." I unwrapped the package to find a beautifully framed photograph I'd never seen before, Thomas at the Steinway in our music room, head thrown back. In laughter as a 10-year-old Michael perched beside him on the bench, their hands positioned identically over the keys in some shared musical joke. "Dad's assistant took this during one of my lessons," Michael explained, his voice softening with memory. I found it while organizing some of his papers I've had in storage since the memorial service. It seemed fitting for the performance. Space. The image captured something essential about Thomas's approach to music. Technical precision infused with genuine joy, professional excellence balanced with playful engagement. More importantly, it represented Michael's willingness to share personal connection with his father in this public context, acknowledging rather than compartmentalizing the relationship that had shaped his own musical development. "It's perfect," I assured him, genuinely moved by both the photograph itself and the gesture behind sharing it. "Would you like to choose where it should hang?" He nodded, this simple curatorial decision representing meaningful participation in shaping how his father would be remembered in the space that had nurtured both their talents. I was thinking adjacent to the piano, where students waiting their turn for lessons might see it, a reminder that serious study can include genuine enjoyment. This thoughtful consideration, honoring both technical rigor and emotional engagement, reflected integration of values rather than continuation of the false dichotomy between creativity and practicality that had characterized our earlier conflict. Not convergence of our different perspectives, but recognition of their complementary contributions to meaningful artistic development. The center's opening week unfolded with a series of events carefully curated to honor Thomas's legacy while establishing the institution's forward-looking mission. Community open houses introduced local residents to available programs. Masterclasses connected accomplished musicians with promising students. Evening receptions welcomed donors and arts advocates who had supported the foundation's expanded vision. Throughout these activities, I observed Michael moving with increasing comfort between his established professional identity and more personal connection to the center's purpose. With donors, he emphasized the cultural and educational value with persuasive precision. With young musicians, he shared technical insights gained through his performance career, while occasionally referencing his father's teaching approach with genuine appreciation rather than obligatory acknowledgement. The culminating event, a formal evening concert featuring Michael performing selections from Thomas's chamber works alongside conservatory students, drew capacity attendance from both local community members and distinguished visitors from regional artistic circles. As I took my seat in the front row of what had once been our formal living room, now transformed into an intimate performance space, I felt a profound sense of rightness about this evolution of purpose. The Victorian that had sheltered 4 generations of creative development would continue nurturing artistic growth for countless future students. The Steinway, where Thomas had composed and taught, would support new musical exploration, rather than standing silent as museum piece. The home that had witnessed our family's most meaningful moments would generate new significance for an expanded community of creative practitioners. Michael's performance that evening revealed technical mastery, balanced with emotional connection I hadn't witnessed in his playing for many years. His introduction of each piece included not just formal musical analysis but personal context, memories of his father working through particular compositional challenges, insights into Thomas's influences and intentions, occasional humorous anecdotes about domestic interruptions that had shaped certain passages. My father believed music existed primarily as communication between human hearts, he told the audience before the final selection. Technical excellence mattered to him, not as end itself, but as means to more perfect emotional expression. This final piece, composed during my first year at conservatory, represents his attempt to bridge the classical traditions he revered with contemporary forms I was then exploring. A compositional conversation between generations that continues through this center's mission. The musical offering that followed, Thomas's Dialogues for Piano and Strings, embodied this perspective through its sophisticated integration of traditional structures and modern harmonies. Michael's interpretation honored both technical complexity and emotional nuance, his performance revealing deep understanding of his father's artistic intentions while adding his own mature perspective. As applause filled the room following the Final notes. I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey from that confrontational Thanksgiving to this moment of creative continuity and family reconciliation. My midnight decision to transfer the property, made in desperate determination to preserve what mattered most, had ultimately created opportunity for more authentic connection than I could have anticipated in those dark hours of crisis. The reception following the concert brought together the diverse constituents who would shape the center's future: board members, donors, community participants, artistic collaborators. I moved through these conversations with the particular satisfaction of witnessing vision realized through collaborative effort rather than individual control. As the evening concluded, I found Michael in Thomas's former study, now designated as the center's composition room. He stood examining the original architectural drawings my grandfather had created for the Victorian's construction, preserved under glass in custom cabinetry, designed to protect historical documents while making them accessible to students. "I never really appreciated the continuity," he observed as I joined him. "How each generation built upon what came before, while adding their own interpretation. The house itself embodies the creative process, doesn't it? The insight, recognizing physical structure as manifestation of artistic principle, suggested deeper integration of practical and creative values than I had dared hope for during our earlier conflict. Not abandonment of his practical nature, but expansion to include appreciation for less tangible forms of value. That's precisely what I hoped the center would illuminate," I acknowledged. "Not preservation for its own sake, but continuation of creative purpose through thoughtful adaptation." One April evening, as we sat in my garden watching early spring blossoms emerge from winter dormancy, Michael referenced the confrontation that had catalyzed this remarkable evolution with unprecedented directness. "I was so certain I knew what was best for you," he observed, no defensive justification clouding his retrospective assessment. "So convinced that practical considerations should obviously outweigh emotional attachments. I couldn't see that my approach reflected values just as subjective as what I was dismissing in yours." The insight, recognizing subjectivity in his own perspective rather than positioning it as objective rationality against emotional sentimentality, represented fundamental philosophical shift. Not abandonment of practical considerations, but recognition of their contextual rather than absolute nature. "We both had partial wisdom," I acknowledged, offering reciprocal recognition that my midnight decision had perhaps unnecessarily escalated conflict that might have been navigated through more patient engagement, different aspects of what constitutes meaningful life in later years. He nodded, his composer's precision finding perfect expression for what we had gradually discovered through our painful but ultimately productive confrontation. "The most interesting compositions emerge from counterpoint rather than unison, different melodic lines maintaining independent integrity while creating harmonious whole through their interaction." The metaphor captured perfectly what had developed between us, not convergence of fundamentally different perspectives, but recognition of how they might complement rather than contradict each other, creating richer composition through their thoughtful integration than either could achieve in isolation. As twilight settled over the gardens surrounding the Victorian that had catalyzed both our conflict and reconciliation, I reflected on the remarkable journey from that Thanksgiving, confrontation to this moment of mutual understanding. The farewell letter I had written in desperate determination to protect what mattered most had ultimately opened space for more authentic connection than I could have anticipated in those dark hours of midnight decision-making. Michael had packed my bags for Thanksgiving, confident in his assessment of what constituted appropriate care for his aging mother. My farewell note had made him cry, first with shock at unexpected resistance, then with genuine recognition of alternative wisdom he had previously dismissed, and finally with integration of complementary perspectives that enhanced rather than diminished his own understanding of meaningful legacy. The Thomas Bennett Center for the Arts now thrived as living embodiment of creative continuity, students practicing in rooms where their teacher had once composed, community members gathering. In spaces that had witnessed 4 generations of family creativity, historical structure adapting to contemporary purpose while maintaining essential character and significance. My carriage house apartment provided perfect balance of independence and connection, private sanctuary for continued artistic development. Alongside appropriate engagement with the institution, my midnight decision had established. Not isolation in institutional efficiency nor burdened maintenance of excessive space, but thoughtful alignment of physical circumstance with personal values and priorities. Most importantly, the relationship between mother and son had transformed. From hierarchical evaluation of whose judgment should prevail to mutual recognition that different perspectives offered complementary wisdom when approached with genuine respect. Not agreement on all matters, but acknowledgement that meaningful life encompasses multiple forms of value requiring thoughtful integration rather than binary prioritization. As darkness deepened and garden lights illuminated pathways between carriage, house and main Victorian, Michael offered observation that captured the essence of what we had discovered through our difficult journey from conflict to understanding. I still believe practical considerations matter, he acknowledged, no defensive positioning qualifying his statement. And you still prioritize creative purpose and meaningful continuation of values. But I've come to recognize they're aspects of the same fundamental question: how we create lives worth living at every stage, and legacies worth leaving when our individual journeys conclude. The insight represented neither capitulation to my perspective nor continued insistence on his own, but thoughtful integration of complementary wisdom gained through painful but ultimately productive confrontation. Not resolution through dominance, but elevation through synthesis, different melodic lines creating harmonious composition through their thoughtful interaction. My son had packed my bags for Thanksgiving, certain he knew what constituted appropriate care for his elderly mother. My farewell note had made him cry, and through those tears had emerged deeper understanding that transformed not just our relationship, but his own approach to balancing practical considerations with creative purpose, professional accomplishment, with meaningful contribution, financial security with lasting legacy. The property that had catalyzed our confrontation now served its highest purpose. Not financial asset awaiting liquidation nor isolated family dwelling, but vibrant community. Resource continuing creative impact beyond individual participation. The deed I had transferred in midnight determination to protect what mattered most had ultimately created opportunity for more authentic understanding than either of us could have anticipated when facing that decisive moment of crisis and response. We walked together toward the center's main entrance, where light spilled from windows that had witnessed 4 generations of our family's creative evolution. I recognized that my farewell letter had ultimately created not ending, but beginning, opening space for more genuine connection grounded in mutual respect for different but complementary wisdom about what constitutes meaningful life and lasting legacy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.